Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay with us as the Suns get set to shine.
Here's Perry to Gar Hurd. Here's the jump shot.
Comes to Marley, a long three. He got it! He got it!
Oh, little dribble hesitation. Baseline, pull up. Got it. King of clutch.
Oliver, Sir Charles, and he flies in for a wham, bam, slam. Rushed by George defensively. Booker waiting with it. He's way out on the perimeter now. Booker lobs it for Ayton. Ayton looks, goes over to Rubio. Rubio on the drive. Waits, shoots. The shot is not good. Rebound Zubats. He loses it. Suns get it back to Rubio. Time. 6 seconds left in the game. Out to Booker. 5 seconds, 4 seconds. Booker on the drive. Goes up. Here's the shot. Shoot! Booker! And the Suns win the game. Devin Booker at the buzzer puts it up and puts it in. Home run!
Welcome to 7 Seconds or Less, a former podcast about the Phoenix Suns and the NBA. My name is Max McCauley, and I am joined, as always, while admittedly less often than in the past, my co-host, David Nash. David, how you doing, man?
Hey, Max, I'm doing good. How are you?
I mean, I think every Suns fan on the planet right now is doing pretty well, right? Despite the conditions in the world, at least in our little corner of the universe in Suns land, we're all pretty happy.
It's good to be back again talking about a really fun team. I know we did this after the bubble run because that was just too much fun. We couldn't resist jumping on and having a chat about the Suns. And this feels very similar, sitting at 5-1. You know, it turning into the new year. I should say Happy New Year to you and all the listeners as well, Max. But yeah, it feels a lot different to some of those doom and gloom episodes that we used to do, which I think we noted back when we did the bubble special as well.
Yeah, I think everyone's probably pretty happy we don't have a consistent podcast anymore because as soon as we stopped, the Suns became good. So I guess we were the problem. But yeah, so how about before we get into everything, we're gonna talk about the whole team today. We're gonna go over all of it. It's gonna be a fun one, a long one probably.
Yeah.
Before we get into all that stuff, though, David, how about for old times take a little bit of a recap of what we've just been alluding to so far?
Yeah, obviously for normal listeners, our big recap is kind of unnecessary because we won't be back again next week. I wouldn't have thought, but a quick rundown just so the listeners know where we are. When we're having this chat, I suppose, so they know what's relevant and what's not. So, as I said before, Phoenix currently 5-1 in the NBA. And speaking of doom and gloom, Max, I think when I used to rattle off these division, conference, and entire NBA stats, it used to be a little sad. But believe it or not, we sit atop the Pacific Division, atop the Western Conference, and atop the entire NBA right now with our 5-1 record. Don't even share that with anyone, I don't believe. We are clear out in front, and that's after 6 games. As we said, there was the opener against Dallas, 106-102. Book top scored there with 22. At Sacramento, we lost 103-106. Book again with 26. The back-to-back at Sacramento, we bounced back 116-100, which was really nice to see that they could make amends for that one. Mikhail, who I'm sure we're going to talk about quite a bit, had 22 top scoring in that one. The blowout of the Pelicans, I don't think anyone saw that coming, and I don't think anyone saw Jay Crowder top scoring with 21 in that game coming either. That was 111-86. And then 2 106 wins again. There's a lot of 106s here. We went at Utah, 106-95. Book had 25. And then at Denver, back-to-back, 106-103. And DeAndre Ayton top scored with 22 and 11. In other news, Abdel Nader, we saw have that concussion in the preseason games, and he's still out with those concussion protocols, which is a bit weird, but hopefully he's going to be okay long-term. Dario, we've only seen play the 2 games, which we might get into as well with that quad injury. And the rookie, Smith, with the ankle sprain, I believe it is, has been out for the last few games as well, although not sure how much we would have seen him anyway, Max. But I'll throw a question to you kind of early on here. What's kind of the one moment, or it could be a play on court or just something overall where is standing out to you through these 6 games so far?
Maybe I'm a prisoner of the moment, David. I'm going to go to the game that just happened. CP3 hitting that shot at the end of the game.
Yep.
That was the big, like, oh my God, look at this crap. That's Chris Paul just hit the go-ahead shot. And not only that, he was great down the whole clutch. Like, we don't win that game if not for Chris Paul. And that was really the big moment, stood out to me. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely go that one. I actually go we talked about this for a little bit. I think the game before, the pass for the dagger shot to Jay Crowder in the corner there. I mean, the game was already over, but getting trapped basically at half court and throwing that pass just
ridiculous
right into the pocket of Jay Crowder was just absolutely ridiculous. And that was just the moment where I just kind of went, yeah, we got the guy that we all thought we were getting. And then, as you said, very next game he does the other thing that he's known for doing and just seals the game with a clutch shot. So we're going to talk a lot about CP3, I'm sure. But yeah, just a note to the listeners there. We'll probably share a few GIFs of some of the plays and things that we mention to read along with the episode, being that it's in the newsletter format now, Max. But we can probably jump straight in. Maybe you want to give the listeners a bit of an idea about how we're going to attack this one.
Absolutely. One note I want to make on your recap. You were not wrong what you said, but when people hear it, they may think you're wrong. Atlanta's 4-1. They're playing, I think while we're recording this or right after. There's a chance they'll be tied with us by the end of the night. Just want to point that out.
Fair point.
I don't want people to attack us on Twitter, David.
Yeah, hopefully we stay atop, but always good to clarify because we're getting used to people attacking us. I don't know about you, Max, but it seems even more so now that we don't have the podcast for some reason.
Oh yeah, I think you and I both get in trouble for our opinion on a certain someone who I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, what we're going to be doing here, it's kind of similar to, if anybody, I'm sure most of our listeners, our former listeners, our current listeners, also listen to Zach Lowe. Zach Lowe does this thing usually with Kevin Arnovitz, maybe always with Kevin Arnovitz.
Yep.
At the beginning of the season, where they preview by kind of pointing out the 4 or 5 teams that they're most confused by, and then if they overlap, they talk about their overlap. If they don't, they don't. We're not necessarily talking about what we're confused by. We're talking about what we're interested in, I guess, or what we just want to talk about, basically. So we're each going to run down 4 or 5 things. There may be some overlap. There may not be. We don't really know what the other person's going to do. In fact, we don't know at all. So how about you go ahead and lead us off, David? What's starting with you? What's the number one thing that's on your mind?
Well, I was going to be polite and throw it to you. You've thrown me in the deep end here. I'll just go in order of how I wrote and what I wanted to dig into and talk about. So for me, it's Mikal Bridges, Max, and just him in general, to be honest. We're going to be probably a little bit more specific with some of these other players and topics that we bring up, but I guess speaking to Mikal's season so far, it's just everything, Max. Yep. I just want to talk about everything to do with Mikal Bridges because he's doing it on both ends, which is something we've been, I guess, waiting for going into year 3. And, listeners, readers, whatever you want to call them, of the newsletter will have seen in my predictions last newsletter, I kind of thought that this might be coming based on what we saw in the preseason, and it's really nice to see so far this season through 3 games what he has done. I'll read out kind of his stats just to key us off and then maybe throw you a question, but he's almost the most minutes for the team at 33.7 per game. He's second for the team at 15.3 points per game. Second on field goal percentage at 53.3. First, shooting 50% from 3. Not sure how long he's going to be able to keep that up for, but it's very, very encouraging to see. Second as well in rebounds per game. They're kind of rebounding per committee here, behind DeAndre at least. So 5.2 rebounds a game and 1.3 blocks, where he's currently equal first also with DeAndre Ayton. So he's had quite a start to the season. So I've got to ask you, Max, with all those seconds and firsts, has he been our best player? Is he our second most important player going forward? What do you think? Where are you sitting on Mikal right now?
Yeah, great question. One more stat I want to point out to you that I know you know. 0 turnovers on the season.
Yep.
Something. I mean, to be fair, he's at 0.7 assists. He's not playmaking. So yeah, that's how you commit turnovers. But still, it doesn't matter. Like you said, he's playing a ton of minutes, and he's not turning the ball over, which is just wonderful. It's a really good question. I think so far he has been the best player on the Suns so far, taking everything into account. I think Chris Paul has probably had more of an impact on the Suns than he has overall because of the clutch stuff and just the way he's just changed his team's entire identity.
Yeah.
But in terms of just the best at basketball, it's been him. He's been fantastic. Another thing I'll point out too, so staring at his stat page, he has not missed a free throw yet in the season. I mean, man, the offensive improvement, the confidence jump, and that's always what we've been talking about with him, David. Back when we talked about him every week, when he would have weeks where he was just kind of non-existent. You know, in the beginning of last season, he wasn't playing very much, right? He was like, didn't he even miss a couple games, like not for a coach's decision, like early on last season?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just watching the Denver game back before we jumped on here, and Eddie Johnson actually going into a timeout pointed out the exact same thing. You know, his minutes and the amount of minutes just wasn't guaranteed, particularly early on last season, and that's when everyone started to get a little bit worried about Mikal. But yeah, completely different player, and probably you know, the first thing we should talk about is just the 3-point shot, because that speaks to the confidence here.
Yes.
3 more attempts per 36 per game, which is just... Like, when you just say 3, it doesn't sound like a lot. But the fact that he's jumped up from...
It's a lot.
I think it was 3 a game to 6 a game so far this season, and doesn't seem to be slowing down, is just... It's quite incredible, Max.
It's amazing. And the confidence, it's not only offensively. I mean, I think the offensive confidence and feeling himself a little bit on that end is making him even better defensively, too. Some of the defensive plays he's making, some of the blocks are ridiculous. The block he had against Donovan Mitchell... I think it might have been the third quarter of the Utah game. It was the second half, I believe, was just ridiculous. His arms, I mean, when he's finally taking advantage of his physical gifts, because he has some great physical gifts, there's few players who can impact a game defensively the way he does. I do want to answer your question, and you can react to my response on this. I'm sure we're going to get to Ayton more later, and I have some things to say on him that are, a lot of it's positive. But I think that you're talking about going forward, who's our most important player, second most. Booker's obviously the most important player. I have a hard time even imagining an argument for it not being Mikal second at this point with what we've seen. I mean, I guess you can argue the upside thing for Ayton, but my God, man, what does Mikal Bridges need to show you that he's just a future centerpiece of a really, really good title-contending team?
Yeah, it's really hard to, you know, and I guess with the condensed offseason, it's fresher in our mind as well. You watch the playoffs, you see the types of players that come to the fore and really have their fingerprints all over the game. And then you fast forward just a little bit this time to this next regular season and see these first 6 games. And Mikal's just got his fingerprints over everything, whether it's, hitting those big shots, big defensive plays. And again, we're going to get to Ayton, guys, so don't read too much into this. We will talk at length probably about his play so far. But this is all about Mikal for now. And he does. He's the perfect complement to Devin Booker. Perfect compliment to CP3 so far, although they haven't connected as much so far as I thought they might have in the preseason. But his confidence, to before, not passing or not getting the assist numbers, so the no turnovers thing isn't that impressive, I suppose, when you look at the overall assist numbers as well. But he's just attacking more and not looking to pass. He probably had, I think he was averaging maybe 2.5 assists per game in his first 2 seasons, but that was almost because, every time he got the ball, unless he was wide open, he was moving it on to the next guy, which is, a great trait, works really well in Monty's 0.5 system. But, a big part of the 0.5 system as well, Max, is to shoot, pass, or drive in Monty's system within 0.5 seconds. And Mikal's doing all of those things and literally within 0.5 every time. And that's the real confidence boost. I saw Kellen Olson, our friend, post, his 3-point clips this morning, and I had a quick look. He's also shooting 90% in the restricted area, Max.
Wow.
And I think those things, it's only off 12 attempts or something like that, but those two things are very much related because you're seeing guys close out a lot harder on him, and he's actually taking it off the dribble. And you mentioned his length there before on defense. I think probably the biggest thing that has stood out to me so far this season is he now understands his length on offense as well. And he's kind of, he had that really nifty kind of slide under Gobert, I think, in the Utah game where he, kind of got it underneath him for the drive. And just little things like that are just so impressive to watch compared to what we were, used to seeing with the timidness, I suppose, of Mikal.
And it kind of feels like he's just scratching the surface of that stuff, doesn't it? Like, there was a couple times in the Denver game where he kind of took the ball onto the lane a little bit and just rose up for a jumper over the defense. And he missed the shots, I think, both times he did it, if I'm remembering correctly. But, I mean, when you watch it, you're just like, well, yeah, that's going to work. because you can't defend it. He gets too high in the air. His hands are like at the rim level. There's no one's going to block that shot or get close. Which is kind of it's not ironic, but it's funny because like on the other end, he blocks people's jumpers in that situation all the time. But and I think the other key thing, and I mean we've already started talking about this a lot, but I think that the shooting, 50%, like you said, probably not going to maintain 50% because no one maintains that really. The only one that comes to mind, I think Kyle Korver shot 52% in one season, but that doesn't really happen very often. But I think you could say in the mid 40s for sure. I mean, his shot looks so good, David. I expect it to go in every single time he lets it go. I can tell he expects it to go in every single time he lets it go. And there was one. It came off a really good pass. It was unfortunate he missed it, but it was like halfway down. I think it was in the third quarter or fourth quarter against Denver last night. It literally touched every single part of the rim. I think Eddie Johnson said I'd give him a point for that. I mean, even his misses are that beautiful. And when your misses are beautiful, that's when you know you can shoot now.
Oh, he's just shooting with such confidence. There's a couple in transition last night against Denver that were just beautiful. And you can't block them when he rises up like that with his length. And I went back to your point. There's going to be some regression here. As you said, it's going to be very unlikely that he shoots 50% for the whole season. But, don't forget, guys, 43% on exactly 6 attempts in his last season in college, which is exactly what he's shooting right now and is probably around the right amount just by eye. He seems to be letting it fly, at least in my opinion, Max, around the amount that you want him to, taking those open ones, taking a couple of, challenging ones as well. So, 43% in the NBA on 6 attempts would be phenomenal across the whole season here from Mikal. And as you noted, the fact that he's been able to get into the paint, get a little crafty, some of those jail moves that he's probably learned off Devin Booker in the pick and roll. There is a lot to work with there. And just how aggressive he's being with this shot is just such a big thing because, as we go through each guy, Booker's numbers are down. Chris Paul hasn't quite been what you'd expect from an offensive standpoint from him. Ayton is obviously well down on his points per game. So it's been Mikal and another wing that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point who have taken up the slack there. And from both of those guys being that aggressive, it's just really encouraging to see. But, if we shift to the defensive side now, which you brought up before, we're kind of talking all defensive team here potential, right? Particularly if the Suns' numbers stay, not right at the top where they are now, but if they're a top 10 defense, for instance, over the course of the season, Mikal and probably, I guess, Ayton will get some votes and a real look in at some of these defensive teams.
No doubt. Yeah, I think it's as long as they say a good team, as long as they're in the comfortably in the playoff mix, which at this point I have no reason to think otherwise of them. I think absolutely. It also helps they're going to be on national TV a lot more than they have been in the past. They're going to get exposure. They're going to get talked about a lot more. And we got to be honest, like these, especially when it comes down to defensive teams, like that's very narrative based, extremely narrative based. So his name has to be out there in order for him to get it. But I can tell you right now, he'll deserve it, no matter whether he gets it or not. He should be on it, either first or second team, probably first, because again, there's fewer, more disruptive wing defenders in the NBA right now, and the only flaw I would say in his defense is on ball. He can get pushed around a little bit.
Yep.
But he's getting better at that though. It's not like it was a couple years ago. He's definitely getting better at that. I mean, even Millsap was having trouble against him last night. He blocked a Millsap jumper, a turnaround. There's really nobody who can get away from the enveloping arms of Mikal Bridges right now. David, I have a question for you about Mikal.
Let's do it.
I'm springing this on you. I think this is one of the harder questions to answer. Just based on, assume he plays the way he's played so far the rest of the season. Not the 3-point shooting 50%, but just like he's this good basically.
Don't ask me, Max. Don't ask.
Yeah. Oh, I'm asking you, buddy. How much money is it going to cost to keep him?
I'm trying to recall. I don't have it in front of me. I'm trying to recall some of those extensions that we saw this offseason, or just before the season. I think so.
Anunoby is a good measuring point, right? I think he was 4 for 74, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean the crazy thing about Anunoby is when that deal came out, I said that's the yardstick for Mikal right now because Anunoby was like all defense potential, I suppose, hadn't done it before. Everyone notes how great of a defender he is, but just hasn't kind of had the exposure again, like Mikal, to make an all-defensive team, and then shown flashes offensively, and people, I guess, were looking at Toronto and who'd left that team and kind of expected him to take some of the slack up, but they got him locked into the extension before that came. What we're seeing from Mikal, if this comes over the whole course of the season, I'd almost argue that he's above Anunoby in terms of, the all defense. Anunoby's probably a bit stronger. Funny that you noted, the strength thing. I had that down as the one negative as well, particularly when he gets taken to the post by, Luka or, some of the guys that he still does get banged back a little bit. The length helps a lot, like you said with that Millsap one, but, he can still get pushed back a little bit there. But to answer your question, I would say more than OG, basically, right here, right now, which, you're probably looking at, $80 million over 4 years, if he keeps this up. And that, honestly, I would just go lock it in. That's, I wouldn't say it's a steal, but for what he's shown over the course of his whole third year, if it is, this 6-game sample size over the 72 games and maybe even some playoffs, you really see him in the playoffs, which has been a recurring theme over our podcast when we used to talk about Mikal, is how much fans are going to really value how good he is, A, on a good team, and then B, on a playoff team. And we're starting to see it on a good team now, Max, and we're probably going to see it if this keeps up on a playoff team. And his value is going to go through the roof. So I'd lock him in at that, kind of without even blinking.
Yeah, I agree. I think 4 for 80 at this point would be a good deal. I think we'd be happy with that. I mean, if the Suns have a deep playoff run, and he's great, and obviously it'll be totally worth it, but that price could go up. It could go very much north of $20 million a year. I mean, Jaylen Brown got over $100 million, right, in his extension, and I could easily see Mikal getting to that level.
Exactly.
It's not hard to foresee. But you know what? That's what I call a good problem to have, David.
A very good problem to have, and I'll just note, still hasn't missed a game in his NBA career, Max. So if you're going to lock in a guy to a contract like that, his availability is a very good skill for him. That you can.
God, could you imagine, David, if he would have actually gotten injured in that preseason game and we would have just missed him? God damn, man.
It'd be a big different team now, which I'm sure we'll get into it at some point as well. There are some, injury, I guess, concerns to the overall depth of the team, but let's not jinx ourselves too soon. Not sure if you had anything else to note. Probably the only other thing I'd note on Mikal with, defense in particular is, the length is obvious, but his wiry body is actually a real skill in kind of playing as that point of attack defender, which, I kind of expected him to, because I watched a fair bit of Chris Paul on Oklahoma after we, got that trade done. And, he was very rarely guarding point of attack. Chris Paul was always hiding on a small forward or something in the corner. And, I figured that, Mikal was going to have to take a lot of those matchups, particularly with the bigger initiators like Luka and stuff that we've seen so far. So, just the way he can navigate around screens with his body is a really underrated skill, which I'd love for, listeners to look out for a little bit more, because it's not something we, talk about all that often.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think I would just to add to that, his intelligence too. It helps him so much on defense. He knows where to be and what to do at all times. He doesn't make mistakes. The 0 turnovers is not an accident. Again, you were right, and I was right to downplay it somewhat because he doesn't have playmaking responsibilities. But like you pointed out, he still drives, he still attacks. You can still turn the ball over without making plays. Trust me on that. We've had a lot of guards in our past have done that, David. But Mikal Bridges is just so smart. He doesn't make mistakes. It's hard to point out things he does wrong on the court. I think he still sometimes fouls 3-point shooters too much.
Yep.
He'll do every once in a while. But other than that, it's hard for me to really complain about anything he does. He's a really, really smart player. David, unless you have anything else on Mikal, I'm ready to go to the next guy.
I'm excited to see what you're going to start us off with here for your topics.
I don't think it will be a surprise. I'm a big fan of this guy. He hasn't been on our team very long, David, but he has already endeared himself to me.
Jake Crowder.
Jake Crowder. I mean, listen, I love him too. But, come on. It's Chris Paul. And the thing I want to point out with him is when we traded for him and we talked about trading for him and all that talk, we sort of talked about his in terms of the impact he'd have on the team, right?
Yeah.
How he could influence the rest of the players, how he could be a coach on the floor, all that kind of thing, right?
More talk to, the off-court stuff than the on-court, definitely.
100%. All that stuff is what we talked about. What we kind of underestimated, at least I did, and I think based on what I've seen, most people did, was just kind of how awesome he would be to watch for his own play, how great he himself would be. I mean, I think right now, he is second in assists per 36 minutes behind Jokic. If you don't count non-starters, sorry, TJ McConnell, I'm kicking you out. He's third if you count TJ McConnell. He's third if you count him. But this dude can still play. He's at a 52 assist to 12 turnover ratio right now, which is absurd. He's not even shooting well yet, David. His true shooting is below league average, but his shots have been timely, obviously. 4 or 5 in the clutch this season so far, including obviously last night against Denver where he won us that game. by himself. And if you don't believe me, he won by himself. I urge you to go read Gina's tweet about how he convinced Monty to make that challenge at the end of the game.
Yep.
That got us the ball back, and then he promptly took the 8 winning tip down and scored, and then also made 2 free throws. He won us that game. So here's the thing, and here's the question I have for you. Like, we know he's old. He's not going to be here, for 10 years, right? There's a shelf life on this. But how high up the Arizona sports pantheon can this guy get? Like, if we go to a deep Western Conference run and he's just great, or be still my beating heart, we win the title and he's the Finals MVP. Like, I kind of feel like we're underrating how important this guy could be to this franchise, just generally.
I mean, if we're talking about a Finals run or winning a championship, I think he would be right at the top because Cinderella, whatever you want to call it, story that would be able to, come out of that would be huge. I think, failing something as great as that happening, I do think that if he, stays out the full 2 years here, maybe even re-signs again at a, much lesser contract than the big one that, made a lot of fans a little skeptical of trading for him in the first place. Hopefully most of them are across the line now.
I would think so.
The 6 games that we've seen so far. But yeah, I think, it's a point guard team. It's a point guard franchise.
Yep.
Point guard city. We've had, a lot of big names. I think the fan base respects and understands what a good point guard can do for the team. I guess just even as a starting point, Max, if he is the leader taking this team to the playoffs for the first time in 10 years, that in itself is going to place him with, a special place in Phoenix Suns fans' hearts. And as I said, as long as he doesn't get traded and kind of sees out the contract, I think he's going to be up there as far as, how fans look back on his time in Phoenix. And, right here, right now, I've already been looking into, the possibility of him, opting out or extending or, just, having a longer career than the 2 years that's currently in Phoenix. Because you just don't get rid of guys like this when you finally come across them, Max, unless they completely, fall off a cliff or have a bad injury, which could potentially happen with him being, 35 years of age. But if he keeps this up, even to a lesser extent in a more reduced role as the other guys build up around him, he could definitely have a legacy here in Phoenix. And what a great way to kind of finish his legacy in the NBA, which has been a pretty long history, but, lots of people love to knock him about, his achievements or lack of achievements, I suppose, with some of the contending teams that he's been on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this relates to something you and I talked about privately before the season started, but I think is really interesting. And that's kind of like, Chris Paul is brilliant, right? And he saw something that I think most older players don't see. And that is that, going to team up with your other kind of sunsetting stars from your old generation, it kind of ends up usually being sad and not working.
Yep.
It kind of feels like Chris Paul looked around the league and was like, hey, there's this team over there in Phoenix that showed in the bubble, they know that they have talent. They can do some stuff, but, they're dumb. They don't do smart things. They don't know how to win yet. Why don't I go over there? I love Booker. I know that guy's great. I can teach the rest of the guys to be great. I can show this team how to win. That's what a point guard can do, especially a Hall of Fame point guard at the end of his career. And you and I speculated that maybe this would kind of become a model. It can't be too much of a model because there's not very many Chris Pauls.
Yeah.
But, Hall of Fame, some sending point guards going to the young, talented team, showing them the way. It makes a lot of sense.
It really does. And I do wonder, how much of that last season in OKC was the kind of thing that got him in that direction. He had a very similar team there, but, I'm sure Presti was quite honest with him in the direction that they were going to go. Or if he wasn't, you could just see the writing on the wall with the amount of lottery picks and stuff that they're stashing away, that it wasn't going to be a ultra competitive team like he could get in Phoenix. And yeah, I think you're right. I think he has clashed with a lot of guys, clashed with Harden, clashed with Blake and DeAndre Jordan even towards the end of his Clippers career. He saw a situation where he would be the voice. He would be able to kind of impart all his wisdom.
Yep.
And, the Monty factor obviously had a big say in it as well, in the relationship that they had, that he was kind of comfortable coming over. And, to that, I think he had a great quote after the Denver game last night where he said, win or lose in that game, he knew already kind of what he's got in this team. He's kind of convinced, which was just awesome to hear because,
Nice.
Us non-pros can sit back and kind of, as we did, before we jumped on here, wonder how good this team might be. But to hear it directly from his mouth is very, very comforting for a fan like me sitting at home wondering what this team can possibly be. And it's not fluff. You hear the kind of really pro quotes out of certain guys in the NBA, but Chris Paul isn't going to say something like that if he doesn't believe that the team's going to be able to back it up. So, yeah, I think that was really encouraging. I can't help but feel, Max, and think just about Rubio. I think we were a pretty pro-Rubio podcast last year. I think we both really understood kind of the floor-raising potential that he had for the team and always tried to point out kind of what he was doing for the team, even when his shot wasn't hitting. But I guess the thing for me and the lens that I'm looking through is like, we've touched on a little bit already, but like, what's Chris Paul bringing to this team that Ricky Rubio just didn't last year and probably wasn't going to be able to this season either, Max?
Yeah, no, it's just Chris Paul is just a different stratosphere of what's the right word for it? It's not notoriety or fame, but sort of just like maybe you can fix my words for me here, David. But it's basically just kind of like he demands a different level of respect from his teammates than Rubio does.
Cachet is what I've got written down.
That's a good word.
That's around the NBA, just way higher than Rubio.
It's about as high as it gets, right? I mean, he's the president of the Players Union. He's been an All-Star 10 times or 11 or whatever it is.
Yep.
He's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Like, there's just a different level of guy. It's a guy who hasn't been on the Suns since Steve Nash, right? That's the last guy we had like that. Mm-hmm. So it's just a whole different thing, and it just works so perfect. I love the point you made about sort of how he clashed in the past with other players on his teams who I think at times would kind of be like, hey, I want to go get my own. I want to be the star. All that kind of crap that happens in the NBA. That's not this team. This team wants to win desperately. Devin Booker has scored 70 points a game. He's been absolutely incredible. He's even been to the All-Star game now. What he hasn't done is win consistently, and he's obviously committed himself to it. You can complain about Booker all you want this season. We'll get to him later. The turnovers are a problem. We'll get to it. But you can't criticize his commitment to win. It's obviously there. He is deferring in a large way to Chris Paul, as I expected him to, and I think it just goes to the whole point that the old man Chris Paul with a young team teaching them, it's just the perfect model.
Yep, I love it, and I've loved what I've seen so far. You mentioned just before that he's not even shooting well yet either, which I definitely expect to change. I'm not seeing anything out there. I don't know about you, where I'm kind of drastically worried that his shooting has fallen off a cliff or something like that. I just think he's been quite unselfish. He's passed up a lot of shots, I would say, particularly in the mid-range, trying to get other guys involved, and even frustrated me at times. But I guess the difference with a guy like Chris Paul is he knows when he has to shoot, and he's taken those really important ones, and that's why I'm not going to crush him for it, because it's not like he's passing up game winners or shots we really need him to take. It's really that unselfishness, which I think a lot of people have noted. A friend of the pod and host of the Timeline pod, Mike Vigil, has noted a lot since we traded for him about how he works his way into games and kind of gets everyone else involved and then takes off in the fourth quarter. But, that's the encouraging thing for me, because I looked back to, the OKC stats, and he's, 17.6 points versus 13.2 so far for the Suns. And it's really all just percentages. He's taking around the same amount of shots. So as soon as he gets back up to kind of 49% and 36% from three, like he was last year, which he's just going to, because we have just as many weapons as OKC did, so he's going to get his shots. I think that's going to be another level that we see from him individually and from the team as a whole. And you already noted the assists as well, so I thought I'd just bring it up. A full 2 assists per game over what he was averaging with OKC last year, so he's taken himself up another level there, and I guess picked up a lot of the slack that Devin Booker has kind of given, I suppose, because of some of the problems that he's had, which, as you said, we'll get into.
Yep. Last thing on Chris Paul, not concerned at all about the shooting. Just not. Once he starts missing the ones that win us games at the end of Dallas game and the end of this the most recent Denver game, like that's when I'll be concerned, I guess.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to be concerned about a guy who's winning us games with his shooting. He'll get better. Okay, I think we're ready for your second thing you want to talk about.
Yeah, let's go with... I kind of cheated here. I wanted to make sure we touched on both of these guys, because we've got a finite amount of time, as much as we could probably go all day and all night here. So I'll throw the question at you, and you and the listeners will see where I'm going with this. But will Crowder or Johnson be starting later in the year for this team, Max?
It's a really, really good question. You can make a pretty solid argument that Cam Johnson's outplayed him so far this season. They've both been very good. Cam Johnson's been a flamethrower on offense, an absolute flamethrower. I still think they're going to value the veteran thing with Jay Crowder.
Yep.
Having both Chris Paul and Crowder on the floor to start games and consistently I think is a really good thing for the team in general. I also think this team is going to be preparing to play in the playoffs.
Yep.
And, I don't know if there's any chance Cam Johnson starts later this season, maybe. It's so hard for me to see him starting game one of the first playoff series, man. If you're Monty, you want Jay Crowder in that role, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I said that in my newsletter on Crowder. If for some reason he didn't start the season in the starting lineup because, he missed a fair chunk of that preseason and stuff, I was definitely expecting him to be in their game one of any potential playoff series. And We've seen why, I think. As you said, he's a vet, he's solid, he's strong. It's nothing on Cam Johnson, who's definitely outshooting him at the moment. We can touch on, I guess, why we're seeing that more from Johnson out of the bench lineup as well, and how we may not see that if he's with the starters a little bit more. But yeah, Crowder's just solid. Really wanted to make sure we talked about him here because he's probably impressed me more than I was expecting, and I was already high on the signing for what he was going to bring. But just kind of, some of his passing is not something I expected out of him at all. It's nothing crazy, but he's, averaging 2.5 assists at the moment to, just 0.7 turnover, just moves the ball on, and has been willing to kind of attack off the three as well, which is something that the luxury that I guess he gets even as an average 3-point shooter because he's so willing to chuck it up. Guys really run him off the line, and he's shown just a little bit of shake that I wasn't sure that he still had in his game, seeing him, I guess, particularly for Miami in the playoffs. So I've been encouraged. I was really, I guess, wondering because I think I'm a little bit biased because of what I wrote before the season started about how valuable he was going to be. So I really wanted to check in with you and see what you thought through 6 games so far of the Jay Crowder experience.
I really agree with you. And I think the really crazy thing I was not expecting is like you kind of said, the off-the-bounce scoring ability, which he's shown a little bit of. And I thought he had 0 of it. So if you would have told me 6 games into the season that Jay Crowder was shooting 34% from 3, I would have said, okay, it doesn't shock me. That's kind of about where he is, his average 3-point shooter. He probably isn't affecting that game that much in offense.
Yeah.
But there's been a couple of times this season where he is really in those bench crunch units. I think it's like towards the end of the third quarter last night, I think he had a couple baskets in a row. He got to the line a couple times on moves around the basket. I didn't know he had any of that in his game. It's been really nice to see. Maybe it won't continue, but anything like that, it just helps a lot. It's kind of like what Dario was doing in the bubble for us a lot, where you were going through those stretches where Booker and Paul aren't around or whatever, and someone just grinds out a couple baskets for you.
Yeah,
those baskets are key, and I think he's gotten a few of those this season. I like to see that, and the toughness is there. Everything defensively and toughness wise that I was expecting, we've gotten so far from him this season. He's just so big, David. He's a really big guy.
He's so strong. Which if you're going to pick one thing between him and Cam Johnson and guarding bigger guys or playoff series, that's probably the thing. And as you said, Monty probably just leans that way, knowing that he's going to get that toughness out of Jay. Before we move on to Cam and a couple of things with him being in the bench unit and things that Monty's done as well, which I think make it encouraging even if Jay keeps starting. You noticed the shooting, 34%. He's 50% on wide open, and then obviously much, much worse on everything else to get that 34% average, which is, again, why I love him in the starting unit, because he's going to get a lot more wide open looks with the danger of, Booker and Ayton and CP3 and even Mikal attacking as much as he is now that we noted. So, yeah, I just think he's been super solid. Not a depressing signing, which, signing a 3-year deal like that, you'd be a little bit worried if he started out flat in these 6 games. He's pretty much been as advertised, I think, Max, which is encouraging when we talk about Mikal as much as we did already this episode, and now we're going to talk about Cam, and then that's a trio of wings that are all playing really, really well for this team now, Max.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing I want to point out on Jay Crowder is also I loved what we heard from, I can't remember who it was. Somebody reported this, that at the end of the third quarter, when the Suns had their apocalypse, last 2 minutes against Denver, apparently Jay Crowder was just livid with Booker and I think Paul, just about how they played and how they just they were just let off the slack. And really, I mean, he's right. The Suns could have won that game by 30 last night if they would have taken advantage of that Jokic last few minutes instead of just turning the ball over every single time down the floor. And I think that's the kind of like yelling wake up call you need after a lull like that, because you're in danger mode at that point. You're on. That's how you get on the way towards losing the game, is a stretch like that. So Crowder just stepping in with the leadership ability there, even to correct Paul a little bit. You need multiple leaders like that, and that's great to hear about.
Yeah, I think you can't have single voices or even just Paul and Booker, because Booker's probably not going to speak up to Chris Paul too much, particularly early on while they kind of feel each other out. So then I think that's where you get into danger territory if Chris Paul's kind of the lone voice and no one is willing to speak up to him, I suppose, other than maybe the coach.
Yep.
So yeah, Jay, I absolutely loved that quote. I'm like you, I can't remember who reported it first, or else I would say so. But seeing that, and I just finished the third quarter before we jumped on, and when I saw that, I kind of thought that maybe he was on the bench kind of watching those things fall over, and Booker and Paul both turning it over and taking bad shots. He was actually out there, and a lot of the times was wide open in the corner while those guys tried to do too much, which, great that he can kind of point that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize that either, so that's great. So, all right, let's get to Cam Johnson. It's a tough battle between Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges, who has made me smile the most this season while watching the Suns. But man, some of what Cam Johnson's showing as a scorer, not just a shooter, it's pretty damn exciting, David.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned as a scorer, because I think that's the thing with him in this bench lineup. We loved him in the bubble, starting at the 4, but really all he did was sit in the corner and hit open shots that Devin Booker fed him basically off the pick and roll, which was great. And it's great to have a sharpshooter like that. But if Jay can, particularly shoot 50% on wide open looks, he can kind of mimic as much of that as he possibly can from Cam Johnson. Whereas Cam can do so much more than Jay off the bounce, off screens, attacking the lane, all these little things that we've seen from Cam so far in the 6 games that we basically didn't see any of last year. There's that one dunk on the Lakers that I remember that caught everyone off surprise, and that's basically the only highlight that he had that wasn't a 3-pointer last year, whereas he's already had numerous ones that we could show and talk about off the bounce, and that's the most encouraging thing. He's shooting 13.5 points per game at the moment, only in, I think, 22 minutes or something like that. 52% from the floor, 43 from 3, and much like Mikal, Max, 1 turnover so far.
Yeah, I know. Those stats make me so happy, those turnover stats, every time I see them. So his per 36 points per 36, David, 21.8 points per 36. Which is an average start. Booker's about a minute. Obviously, when you play more minutes, it gets harder to maintain the efficiency and the scoring. But, that's ridiculous.
Yep.
That's a lot of points. He is definitely the scoring engine of the second unit on a 70% true shooting, which is obviously just out of control. Out of control good. I think it's hard to focus on it sometimes because he doesn't play as many minutes as others. And, he's not Booker. He's not that much of a star player. He has had just an incredible impact on this team, David. The way that he is keeping the offense flowing on the second unit is a big part of why our second unit is the best in the NBA right now. And it may continue to be for the rest of the season. I hope so. But right now, it's been the best in the NBA, David.
Yep. And just to really lean into the Twins stuff with Mikal Bridges here, you mentioned before, obviously Mikal, no turnovers at all and hasn't missed a free throw. Cam Johnson, just the 1 turnover. And they both have 1.7 free throw makes off 1.7 free throw attempts. Neither of them have missed a free throw so far this season either, which leans, I suppose, into that ridiculous true shooting percentage that Cam and Mikal both have at the moment for the Suns. And 5.8 threes a game. Again, like the Mikal discussion, good to see him just letting it fly. I would love to see him kind of let it fly even more, to be honest, particularly within a second unit where he's kind of got that green light to do so. But, like Mikal, playing really within himself at the moment and being prepared to attack off the dribble and show a little bit off the bounce that we didn't see last season. Not huge passing numbers again, much like Mikal, but I think that's just kind of the profile of this team now. They, even though they had Rubio and Booker last year, they've kind of just gone, Booker and Paul, and hopefully Booker picks it up. But yeah, they're the initiators. When the rest of you get the ball, either move it on to the open guy sitting in the corner because of all the movement, we've found that guy, or drive or shoot the damn thing. Like, you're not paid to, make flashy assists or anything like that. And these guys are just perfect for that. They know that role. And I was wondering whether his name might come up at all during this podcast, but it's just the antithesis of Kelly Oubre experience and what we got so frustrated at watching from Kelly trying to do too much. This team didn't and doesn't need guys to do more than what these guys are currently doing off the bounce, and it's just perfect at the moment.
It's just perfect, and we'll get to it with one of mine, but I want to credit somebody in particular with just how perfect it looks right now. But so I think you mentioned the attempts, and you're right. I mean, they haven't gone up a huge amount, but per 36 from 7.8 to 9.4 is encouraging. He's also playing more minutes. I mean, he's getting up 5.8 a game now, which is nice. I mean, I want him to shoot 8, 9 a game, because every time Cam Johnson shoots, I'm happy. I don't care if it doesn't go in. He should. I mean, it's just he's the best shooter on our team, and he's one of the best 3-point shooters in the NBA. I mean, I don't know whether the numbers bear that out. He's shooting 43%, but like, you can just watch him shoot. If you've ever watched basketball in your life, he's an incredible shooter.
Yep.
And one thing I want to point out too with him, per 36, 1.1 steals, 0.8 blocks. Not gaudy numbers, but like, he's not a stiff defensively. Most people in his player type, scoring fours, I guess is what you'd call it, especially ones who can shoot really well, they're notoriously bad defensively. He is not. He's not Mikal. He's not like an impactful defensive player.
Yep.
But he's almost always in the right place, and he's not a pushover. And I think that part of him is underrated.
Great team defender.
Yep.
And then I'm really glad you brought that up, because one thing that I noted down that goes probably a little more unnoticed, I suppose, which I like to do, is both bigs and smalls will get switched or matched up on Cam, and both types of players think that they can take Cam off the dribble or power through him in the post, and he doesn't win every time, but more often than not, those plays result in either a missed shot or that player giving up and passing the ball on to someone else when they realize that he's not the sieve that maybe the scouting report or whatever you thought Cam Johnson was going in when you haven't played him before. He is getting stronger. He can move his feet laterally. He's got length, not Mikal type length, but as you said, can kind of pick up those handy steals and blocks when he needs to. And that is the big thing that is going to make him a potential, starter going forward for this team, that he's not just your, Kyle Korver specialty shooter type. He's actually going to be, prime Kyle Korver, who could actually be a starter on a team, because he doesn't make mistakes and does all the other little things that the other players don't do. So, yeah, I think that's a great kind of point to end on, and probably the only other thing that I would throw in, which is why I just don't care right now about the starting debate, is we saw a game the other night where Monty finished with Cam instead of Crowder, and as long as he's prepared to do that, then the starting thing just really doesn't. I just don't give a shit.
Nope, and I can guarantee you Cam Johnson doesn't either, because you can tell. That guy just wants to win too.
Yep.
All right, you mentioned defensive sieves, David. That takes me to my next thing, which is we kind of don't have it anymore.
Yep.
As long as Jones isn't playing.
Yes.
And I want to focus on one player in particular. I'm going to offer my defense of Devin Booker for this season so far.
Love it.
We are now 4th in defensive rating, David. We've flirted with being number 1, but we're 4th right now, as opposed to 10th in offense. So we've been better defensively. Before the Denver game, we were kind of benefiting from really, really outlier bad 3-point shooting from defensive team or for the other team.
Yep.
Denver shot 41.4. They kind of adjusted that back a little bit more. So I believe in this. I believe in the defense so far for sure. It's definitely real what they've been doing. And I want to give this defense to Devin Booker. Part of that is because Devin Booker isn't awful on that end so far. He's had his lapses. Don't get me wrong. He always does. But he has, for the most part, been competing very hard on that end. He's fighting through screens. He's mostly in the right place. He's even made a couple like good defensive plays where he junked up a possession, and I don't think he got the steal or anything, but I think there's a couple times where he was the reason why a turnover happened. That's nice to see from him, because if your worst defensive player is a 6'6" guy who's competing on defense, you have a chance to be really good defensively, David.
Yeah, and the way they're building around him, you don't have to hide him as much anymore. That
Yep.
we're very switchy is one thing that I've noticed, and probably one thing I can try highlight in a play while the listeners are watching this. I think the Suns, when they've got those lineups out there with CP3 or even without, because he can certainly hold his own on some bigger guys as well. We're able to switch through. Booker's fighting through screens a lot more. I'm really glad that you mentioned both the numbers and some examples of things that he's doing, because just throwing the numbers out, particularly this early in the season, there's not a lot to them. There's a lot of noise, as you said, a lot of the time. You've kind of got to back it up with what you're seeing by eye. But the really encouraging thing is by eye, just watching these games. We're seeing him fight through screens. We're seeing him, break up dribble handoffs, as you say. It may not result in a direct steal like guys like Mikal Bridges and stuff can get and kind of go down the other end and get an easy bucket. But there's value in breaking up a dribble handoff like that, because it's kind of the primary play from whatever's been called by the opposition. So you break that up, all of a sudden there's only 12 seconds left on the shot clock, and they have to go ISO to their star guy or try and kind of mimic something on the fly. Denver's a lot better at doing that than a lot of other teams, because obviously they've got Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray that can kind of just go with the flow. But a lot of teams aren't good at that. A lot of teams really rely on what the coach calls out and executing and getting stuff right. And if you can break up enough primary action, that's how you become a really good defensive team overall, where you get to the end of the season and you are kind of top 10 in the numbers and what they say. So that's really important, and I think Booker is doing his fair share of that, because we're seeing him in a lot of primary action, whether it's because he wants to guard the best offensive player, your Buddy Hield types. He's always taken on that challenge against the Kings, for example, or he's the worst, quote unquote defender on the team. So teams are trying to attack him, and he's actually holding his own, which again is another huge thing for overall defense for your team. If he's holding up, then teams kind of have to go into secondary stuff. The scouting report or the plan they put in place to play the Suns, all of a sudden 2 quarters in, isn't working as well as they thought, so they have to kind of deviate to something else. And they're the really little things that just giving that effort, breaking up a few things, is really underrated, that we haven't seen in the past from Devin. And I'm really glad that you kind of brought it out, because the other thing, is a negative at the moment, is the turnovers. They're really the only 2 things that I could note down right now about Devin Booker. Everything else is pretty much exactly the same, Max. Like maybe outside of getting to the line as well, which we might talk about kind of in a little bit. But they're the really 2 things that I thought of, and one's a negative and one's an ultra positive, really, based on what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, it's just so important to the team generally that he does this. I think there's a reason why Chris Paul, some people started talking about it, he called him a two-way player, and he said that what I really appreciate about Devin Booker is he's a two-way player.
Yeah.
And that is not something that's ever been said about Devin Booker before, and even in the context of us praising him for his defense, like, I'm not going to say that, but I know why Chris Paul is saying that. He's saying that for a reason. He wants to set it up where, Booker, you have to play defense. You're going to disappoint me.
Yep.
Right? Like you're here to play two things. You are a two-way player, and that's just a good example of what Chris Paul is doing for the team. But yeah, I think we got to get into the turnovers a little bit with Booker, because I guess we should just use this as an opportunity to talk about him generally.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's bad. I think in the first few games, I bought what I think Tom Chambers said, that a lot of the turnovers were on other players. But early on, I think that was the case. I do not think that was the case last night. And I don't remember Utah as well, but I remember thinking that he had some problems there too. I think that, yeah, you had the junked up offense excuse at the beginning. Booker, you got to take care of the ball better, man. He's forcing some things. And a lot of it, and I talked with Kellen about this last night a little bit, It's not so much the ideas. I think he has fine ideas. He is seeing the floor fine.
Yep.
It's that he's throwing really junk passes. They're off target. They're just bad passes, David.
Yep, there was a period there where I was worried that he maybe had an injury of some sort, because he's just, as you say, throwing passes that are right there that we've seen him make numerous times before, and he's just off target. And it is really weird to see. I'm not panicked by it just yet for that very reason. We've got numerous games, lots of data, plenty of seasons of Devin Booker in those exact same situations, making the right play and executing. So it's going to have to be a few more games and stretches of bad play before I really panic on this. I've got a little bit of a theory, Max. I don't know whether I'm on the right track with it or not, but I'll throw it out anyway. I think he's being too unselfish.
Yeah, I see what you mean there. I think he's trying to force passes when they're not there.
He's trying to take
you can see it.
He's trying to take Chris Paul's lead.
Yeah.
He's seeing this guy come in that he idolizes, who, you know, really takes a step back through 3 quarters and gets everyone involved. And, you know, just looking at it, he's down 2 field goal attempts a game at the moment compared to last year. You can put some of that down to being with Chris Paul, but Chris Paul's not taking any more shots than Ricky Rubio did, and there's lots of other guys taking less shots than they did as well. So I just don't think it's that. I think he's being too unselfish, and this is purely by eye, and then he's getting himself into situations where he would normally take a shot, and he'll be in the air, or he'll be already away from the basket, and that's when he tries to make the pass, and either the defense has read it and stole it off him, which we've seen quite a lot, just straight out of his hands almost, or the pass that he throws is just off because he's not in the usual position or something that he would be in when he throws that pass. And that's just kind of my theory that I'm working on kind of at the moment, which I hope, if we see just a little bit more of a balance going back to being aggressive. And I mentioned it before, I do think it's also kind of tied to the lack of free throw attempts. Like, he's under 4 free throw attempts at the moment, which is just not Devin Booker as far as we're concerned. He attacks, he gets calls, he's selfish in transition because he's our best player. He should be selfish. And I just think all of that leans into he's trying to follow Chris Paul's lead just a little too much here. And in the next 5 to 10 games, I think there'll be enough film sessions, Monty getting in his ear, where they kind of go, hey, Devin, you know, go back to being Devin and we're going to be okay.
I'm not going to push back on your theory, David, because I think you're exactly right about it. The only thing I'm going to push back on is maybe some of the characterization of it.
Okay.
Is he being too unselfish? Is it too unselfish? It's definitely not good for his game. It's making him worse, but I mean, isn't maybe what he's doing, setting the tone, kind of making Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges what they are to some extent? Like, he's participating in this, kind of equal opportunity, everybody gets to eat offense.
Yep.
Maybe this is what he should be doing to start the season. And, I'm like you. I'm not worried about Devin Booker. I know who Devin Booker is. There's nobody on this team I'm worried less about than Devin Booker. So I know this is going to come down. I mean, he's always kind of a high turnover guy. He's not going to be – I mean, right now he'd be the turnover king of the world, and his record would never be broken if he continued on this pace. His pace is ridiculous right now.
I think there was a stat I saw this morning where, what you just said isn't actually hyperbole. He's like leading the NBA history in terms of turnovers through the first 6 games of the season.
I think he has 35 or something. It's ridiculous. It can't be. It's not sustainable. It's terrible. But, and again, you can be differential without turning the ball over like a fool. But I do think that is part of what's going on here. So I'm not worried about the unselfishness. I'm more worried about the execution of it, I guess, the way I'd put it. But overall, I still think he's been pretty damn good in a lot of ways. I mean, he's still a ridiculous scorer, unstoppable. He closed down that Utah game. Mm-hmm. That was great to see. He had a huge shot in the Dallas game along with Paul. He's still showing up when we need him. He's still an amazing scorer. I mean, even though he hasn't played very well this season, he's still above the average on true shooting, just because he always is. It's impossible for him not to be. I think he's still shooting historically well from the mid-range like he always does.
Yeah. He's
still Devin Booker. I think it's kind of a matter of smoothing out some of the loose ends and figuring out how to play this in this team. And one last thing I'll say, David, on it. I remember vaguely last season that he started off pretty slowly. Not like this. I don't think, especially not with turnovers, obviously.
Yeah.
But I remember it taking a little while for him to get in his groove. While I think he was letting the team find themselves. So I'm hoping that's kind of what this is too, and we'll see the real Devin Booker again soon.
Yeah, I think you ended it really well there. If this was like a general downturn across the board, then all of us should be panicking a lot more. But as far as being a scorer and an efficient scorer goes, he's that dude. Yep. He's the exact same dude that we're used to seeing, and he's not missing shots. He's just as efficient from the mid-range as you said. It's literally just the turnovers, and I guess to a lesser extent the free throw attempts, and then in exchange for that we've got much better defense. So yeah, it's pretty hard to be too down on it right now because it's literally just one aspect of the game. And I like what you push back on there too, because you might be right. It might just be he needs to settle into whatever the groove is, and in 5 to 10 games, because he is such a smart guy. We've heard so many stories about how he picks things up so quickly in development, and that's why he's developed so quickly in a place that frankly has been terrible at developing players for the last 5 years, and it's kind of a minor miracle. So whatever it is, whether it is more unselfish, going back to being more selfish, he'll find the groove. I've got no doubt about that, and we'll be fine in 10 games time. And probably the next time we speak on a podcast, in however long it ends up being, we'll be raving about Devin Booker again.
Yep, I fully expect to be. Okay, David, let's go to your third thing now.
Should we take a break? Do you want a little break here with Did You Know before we go into the rest?
Oh, sure. That's probably a good idea. Let's break it up. Yeah, let's go to Did You Know.
All right, Max, we got to keep Did You Know going whenever we do these one-off pods, but I promise to go easy on you. First up, a random question where I wouldn't expect anyone to get the answer, so a free hit for you, if you will. If I gave you the following stat line from the 23rd of January 2019, do you know who I'm talking about? It's Cleveland at Boston, 14 minutes and 53 seconds played, 0 from 1 from the field, 2 points, 1 assist, 2 steals, and 2 turnovers. Does that ring a bell, or can you think of anyone that might possibly be in the Phoenix Suns world?
The only thing I can think of, I think this is wrong, but because Jay Crowder was on those teams, I was going to say him.
It's not him. That was the last NBA game Cam Payne played before he was given a lifeline by the Suns in the bubble. And his comeback is so wild, I thought he deserved the entire Did You Know segment dedicated to him before we, I'm sure, talk about him a little bit later. Let's go back all the way to the 2015 NBA draft. Max, Cam Payne put his hat in the ring after 2 college seasons at Murray State, where he averaged 18.5 points, 5.7 assists, and 3.7 rebounds on 43% from the field and 36% from 3. Next question. Can you tell me what slot Payne was drafted at in the 2015 draft?
He was drafted by the Oklahoma City Thunder, 14th overall.
Exactly. Conveniently wedged between one Devin Booker and also Kelly Oubre Jr. directly after him. Going to throw another one at you here, Max, and then give you a bit of a break until the end. Cam has only played for 4 teams so far in the NBA. I gave you one before, and you obviously know the current one. So can you tell me who he was drafted by, which you just mentioned before, and the order of teams? So basically, if you've been listening along, guys at home, there's only one missing team here, and then the order that they come in. Max, can you think of what they are?
We'll see. Oklahoma City drafted him. I remember the trade. They traded him to Chicago.
Correct. He played 2 seasons at Oklahoma for 77 games, and then 3 seasons actually at Chicago for a total of 67 games only. Then he went to that team I mentioned before for a very short stint of 9 games. Who was that?
Well, you didn't say which one he was on, I don't think. Maybe you did. Maybe I missed it. It was Cleveland or Boston. I'm going to guess Cleveland. I don't remember him being on Boston.
Correct. It was Cleveland. And then, of course, Phoenix for the bubble and this current season. So, Max, that leaves us with 153 games played before arriving in Phoenix and 14 games since. Keep those 2 numbers in mind for the end, 153 and 14. But first, I mentioned earlier that Payne was drafted out of Murray State. He is one of 3 players in the last 10 years to be drafted out of that small school, all of which happen to be point guards. Well, arguably. The other 2, Max, are of course Ja Morant, who was drafted in 2019 at number 2 to the Grizzlies, and the other, none other than the pointless God, Isaiah Cannon himself, who went 34th to Houston in 2013.
God.
For our one-off pod here and how far we have come since the start of this 7 seconds or less podcast in terms of the point guard position, Max, I thought it was a very good way to finish the Did You Know segment in typical weird fashion like I like to do. But before we fully close out here, do you remember those 2 numbers I threw up at you before?
Was it 153 and 14?
Correct. The reason I wanted to end on those is I wanted to illustrate how crazy Payne's NBA resurgence has been, and maybe why it shouldn't be that shocking with a little game of higher or lower. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, I've balanced everything out with per 36, so we get like a fair balance here. So it's Cam's stats side by side. I'll give you his stat before Phoenix, and I want you to tell me if his Phoenix run is higher or lower. I'll start you off with an easy one. Games played, 153.
Definitely under.
Yep, 14 with Phoenix, as we said before. 2-point attempts from the field per 36. Before Phoenix, it was 7.9 max.
I would say down on 2-point.
I tricked you. It's push. 7.9 exactly with Phoenix. 3-point attempts, 5.5 before Phoenix.
Ooh, I'd say higher.
It's lower, but only just 5.4, so almost equal again. One thing that was noted when Payne came on board, free throw attempts, 1.3 before Phoenix.
Down.
Correct. Lower again, 1.1 so far in Phoenix. Rebounds, 4 before he came to Phoenix.
I know he's better in the bubble with that. I'll say up.
Yep, he's rebounding quite well. 5.7 in Phoenix per 36. Assists, 5.6 per 36 before he came to Phoenix Max.
Up.
Up, but only just at 6 per game. Steals, 1.5 before Phoenix.
Down.
Another trick one, exactly the same, 1.5. Turnovers, 2.3, and I guess it's the opposite, but go with what you think is happening in Phoenix. Is it lower or higher?
I think he's been better than that.
Yep, 2.1, so just below. And then finishing points, 13.4 before he came to Phoenix per 36 max.
Oof. I'd say lower than that.
No, he's higher, 16.8 per 36. He hasn't played...
Oh, per 36.
Yeah, hasn't even played as much as he did in the bubble so far in the 6 games. So that's quite impressive what he's putting up points per game. But I know that's likely hard for you and the listeners to keep track of overall. So a quick summary for you. Payne's overall attempts are relatively even from both 2 and 3 pre and post Suns. He is getting to the line at the same rate, in fact, actually worse. His assist to turnover ratio has hardly changed either. The one key difference, he's making shots. He sports an overall 49 field goal percent versus his old of 39, and that's the reason he's averaging roughly 4 more points per game per 36. As they say, Max, it's a make or miss league, and frankly, I can't wait to see if he can keep making shots, just as I can't wait to discuss the rest of what we've seen so far. So let's jump back in, and maybe we can jump back in with Cam Payne, Max.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, it's my 4th thing, not my 3rd thing, but let's go ahead and jump to it, because it's very funny. I did a very similar sort of statistical thing with Cam Payne. Not as elaborate, but I think it's interesting. So I wanted to use Cam Payne and kind of talk about the bench generally as well.
Yep.
But one thing I wanted to point out with him is I think a lot of people were like, they were skeptical going into the season with him as the backup guard, which I think is warranted based on, he's had a reputation in the league that hasn't been great. He was amazing in the bubble, but that was 8 games. What are we going to expect? Like, is he going to be even 80%, 70% of what he was in the bubble? Because obviously, if he was, that would still be, adequate, right? That's what we were kind of hoping for. I don't know how many of us expected him to be better than he was in the bubble, but I kind of feel like he is. His per 36 on assists turnovers, David, in the bubble was 4.7 assists to 2.2 turnovers per 36. That jumped to 8.0 assists, 1.9 turnovers. He almost doubled the assists per 36 while decreasing the turnovers. Pretty good. His finishing around the rim went from 54% in the bubble to 70%. And I think his finishing is really sticking out so far, David. He is making some difficult finishes look not so difficult around the rim so far. He has fallen slightly as a 3-point shooter, David. He is only shooting 47%.
Terrible.
Compared to 52% in the bubble. It really just not good. He is the team's 3rd best on-off right now. Really second best behind Cam Johnson because Dario's is ridiculously small sample size high. So I guess I turn it to you, David. Do you think the campaign's the biggest reason why this bench unit has been so good?
I think it is. And I think it's, almost time to stop doubting. And I say that as one of the doubters. I was doubtful of the signing, even though I guess in one of my newsletters was slightly encouraged by Cam Payne's scrimmage games before the bubble, just because I thought he was the only one that was, capable of running the second unit when you looked at some of the other options they had back then. But I talked all off season about how I wanted them to add a 3rd guard and how, relying on campaign was probably not the best way to go into the season. And, even went as far as saying, oh, it's not too bad because they've got Galloway and Etuan Moore and Carter, and therefore if Payne's a disaster, we can just go to more, stagger and point book and throw those guys in at shooting guard, so it won't be the end of the world. But as you say, through 6 games, he's been bubble cam again, if not better. As you said, the shooting's come down a little bit, but on top of that, the assists to turnover ratio has come up. I absolutely love that you noted that down because, in true fashion for us, it was the first thing that I had down. I was like, holy shit, he's averaging over 8 assists per 36 and less turnovers than the bubble. Like, what's going on here? He's acting like a real point guard, which was the real note that I had down. I think if you go back to the bubble or, take yourself back to the bubble, he was really that 6th man spark plug guy who just kind of was shooting it like, a nuclear, whatever you want to call it. And that was the reason he was playing so well. There was a little bit of point guard stuff in there, but as you noted before, the numbers weren't actually great. He was averaging 4 assists, 2 turnovers or something like that. This offseason, Monty really talked him up as a point guard and a guy that could play with both Booker and Chris Paul. And I think that's what we've seen through 6 games. He's playing much more as an initiator. His points are down, even just slightly. He's finishing well around the rim, as you said, but the more positive stuff we've seen from him has been as an initiator, getting everyone else involved. We talked about Cam Johnson being the number 1 kind of option off the bench. Dario's only played 2 games, but when he's playing, he's being quite aggressive looking for his shot. So Cam's kind of playing this, worldly position where he's getting everyone else involved, not just looking for himself, which I think is the key difference to the bubble. He kind of came in and was like, where's my shots? Where am I going to get my shots? Yeah. Then I'll think about passing. And that's the real big difference. And it's, to be frank, like really fucking encouraging because that's a backup point guard, not, I tend to not like the chuckers that come in because, it's only a matter of time before those percentages regress, which they're gonna with Cam. It's been 14 games total. They might still be good, like I noted in Did You Know, they might not be as bad as what, almost had him out of the league forever, but they're gonna come down a bit. But the fact that he can get to the rim a little bit. What did you say he was finishing around the rim?
So it's from 0 to 3 feet, which is how Basketball Reference characterizes it. 70%, up from 54 in the bubble.
Because I had him in the restricted area as like 9 of 19, which I thought was really strange because I thought he'd been quite crafty, getting kind of to the rim. But I think that's just where, I think it's actually a little bit further than the restricted area where I looked on NBA. So it's probably floaters and things like that he hasn't been very good at. But I think you nailed it. He's probably finished everyone that I can think of around the rim, whether reverse or, that little up and under move almost that we're seeing him use against, guys like Rudy Gobert, where he almost gets the shot off before Gobert's expecting him to let it go, and therefore it kind of neutralizes those guys at the rim. So yeah, I'm super encouraged. I don't know what else we can touch on with campaign other than positive stuff, Max.
Yeah, no, there's nothing negative here. I wanted to point to something you said about him and his scoring. I agree that he is not looking for a shot as much, but when he does, like there's been a couple end of shot clock situations where he has made something out of nothing. He can still do that, and I like that he's picking his spots well when it comes to that.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to point out with him is the defense, and particularly the effort he's giving on bigs. Oh my God, man. What he was doing with Zion didn't even make sense. Like, listen, he's not pushing Zion around or anything, obviously, but the fact that he even tries, even has a thought in his head that campaign can even do anything with this monster, Zion Williamson. Like, it's just amazing that he's even trying. Like you said, anything else I have to say about him will be positive, so we can just go on, I guess, and just assume everything else is positive.
Yeah, I just think those 2 things that we've spoken about most in this section, which, I don't know, the listeners may or may not have been expecting it, particularly from Bubble Cam, who, as we said, was just all about making shots. The fact that he has the defense and the initiation stuff to lean on when the shot isn't falling. The initiation stuff might get a little bit harder for him when the shot isn't falling because teams might sag off a little bit. But the fact that he's got those 2 strings to his bow, even if he goes through a rough patch of shooting, is why I'm kind of convinced he's staying in the rotation, at least for the foreseeable future. Whereas beforehand, I think I was, as I said, one of the doubters who was like, Monty's going to keep him on a really short leash, and as soon as he starts playing bad and has a couple of inefficient nights, he's going to get yanked. But if he's giving that level of effort on defense, even just in itself from that position, like a Javon Carter, that's how he's earned his minutes as well. It's going to be really hard for Monty to take him out.
I don't know why the hell you would, right?
Exactly.
He's only doing good things. Yeah, he's reached that point with players where it's a good point to reach, where not only are you not like something I hate to see on the floor, like when he plays, like Jamal Crawford a couple years ago, it just like burned my soul when he was playing.
Yep.
And then not only are you above like to the part where it's like, okay, I'm okay with you out there. Javon Carter's been here a lot of times. Like I'm fine with him out there. It's good. He's generally fine. He's not killing us. Cam's reached the next level above that, where it's like I expect him to do good things.
Yep.
I anticipate positivity from him, and that is it's a good thing for a point guard. I do want to say, David, the one time I'll toot my own horn here on this podcast, I was the pro campaign voice, I think, for most part. I think I was the guy saying when people were freaking out about DJ Augustine or not getting backup guards, like, I think there's a decent chance campaign's going to be good. I mean, I saw him in the bubble; he was amazing. It's not guaranteed or anything, but it's the most recent thing we saw. Just one little toot there, David.
I think you deserve it. I think it's the key difference between you and I, particularly over all the conversations that we've had. I'm always probably on the more pessimistic side, maybe just thinking about backup plans and things like that. I really love that when you see something, you're all in on it, and
not on Mr. Bridges, David. You have the most Mr. Bridges stock in the whole Suns Twitter fandom.
Yeah, well, that's a little bit different. I just don't bet against high IQ guys with tools like that, even when the shot's not going in. So I got lucky there with my Bridges Bitcoin, as I like to call it. But yeah, I think just being so sure of that, the longer it goes on, the more kind of right and toot your own horn, Max, because we was going off a very small sample size, but it surely hasn't slowed down yet. So I really hope that it doesn't, because that was we can probably talk a little bit about backup bigs towards the end of the episode here, and that being a weakness if some things happen. But backup point guard was looking like the other thing that wasn't really addressed from the outside, at least. But we're seeing why. They had confidence just like you did, Max, by the looks of things.
All right, now let's get to something I want to do a mea culpa on a little bit here, David. So we're going from the highs to the lows.
All right.
And not totally. I mean, I'm going to defend myself, but I want to talk about DeAndre Ayton next, David. I think it's time.
Yep, we've left it long enough. Hopefully there's people still listening who were probably like, when are they going to talk about DeAndre, particularly on the back of the last game in Denver. So let's do it and not get ourselves yelled at, hopefully, too much, Max.
The first thing I wanted to do was exactly what you just did, praise him for last night, because that was, I mean, no one's going to argue, no matter how you feel about DeAndre Ayton, that was his best game of the season. It definitely was.
Yep.
He was wonderful on offense and defense, especially defensively, and he's been pretty good on defense all season. There's been lapses as there are with him, but overall definitely positive on that end. But last night he was a difference maker on that end, and offensively too, David.
He was, and that was kind of the key thing. As you said, defense has been a pretty consistent thing over the 6 games, and over, probably even longer than that. I think the strides that he's made there and what you can count on him from the defensive end is definitely worth talking about and hyping up. The offense is the complete opposite of that, where you just have these real highs and lows, and probably no more so than comparing the one loss that we've had at Sacramento versus the last win that we had at Denver, which I think is kind of where you're going with this. So I'm happy to give you the floor for a little bit to discuss the differences in no pun intended here, the split personalities of DeAndre Ayton that we see every now and then.
You say we saw Alejandro against the Kings, David?
Yeah, possibly.
Here's the mea culpa I want to issue, and it's related to this, so it's perfect to segue into. On Twitter, after that game you just mentioned, David, the Sacramento game, I believe I tweeted something, paraphrasing, I don't remember exactly what I said, but next time with the number 1 overall pick, we should try drafting somebody good, I think is what I said. Here's what I want to say about that. That was poorly phrased. Anybody who's listened to this podcast for a long time knows my obsession with being good at the game of basketball rather than just being athletic and huge and skillful and just being good for that reason. Just understanding where to be, understanding all that kind of stuff, all the stuff that Chris Paul is like the best in the world at. When I say that Jeff's pretty good, I mean good at basketball. Obviously, just by nature of who he is, he's a freakishly good basketball player.
Yeah.
Especially if you look at around the world, obviously comparing to every human, but even if you're comparing to NBA players, of course he is.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean by that. He frustrates you so much with the lapses and how he just doesn't seem to get it sometimes. Sacramento first game was a great example. He was just awful. He was non-existent on offense and just terror. He was in foul trouble all the time early in the season. Just looked like he was not interested in being there. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't focused. He wasn't with the rest of the team. But listen, the Denver game, if he keeps playing like that for the rest of the season, there'll be nothing to complain about from me or anybody else. He knew how to play basketball last night. He was quote good, any kind of good, any way you want to use the word good at basketball last night against Denver. He was good, David. He was great. I just hope we see more of it.
Yep. I think for the most part, you and I have been pretty much in lockstep on DeAndre Ayton. I think early on, and probably still now, I'm a little bit higher on him overall in the draft class, maybe versus yourself. And that is down to what you kind of see in NBA players and wanting the basketball player over the athlete. I definitely think I share that with you a little bit more. I just think that I can see how they can make the athlete into a very efficient, effective, impactful NBA player as well, but it all kind of comes down to DeAndre. I keep referencing the newsletter edition, which I'm sure everyone listening has read, but if you haven't, go back and have a look at it. It talks about exactly that. I don't think that we can keep forcing ourselves into thinking that DeAndre is going to read the game at a high level, make just crazy rotations, and be that guy who looks like he's played basketball since he was 3 years old. I just frankly don't think he's got it in him, and I think that's what you were getting at, and where it really becomes frustrating when he has those down nights.
Yeah.
What I do think he has in him is being an athletic freak. So if he outworks and outruns and outpowers and isn't timid and just plays like a crazy man 110% every night, he's gonna look like he did against Denver, because it's just really hard to stop guys like that in the NBA. I think I say it on the podcast, or used to say it on the podcast all the time, Max.
Yep.
The big guys don't get smaller at the end of the game. Like, we saw it last night, both on defense and offense. Even when he was gassed, he had a huge impact on that game. And that's why we get frustrated with a game like Sacramento, where I would just say is both the team's fault and DeAndre's fault, where they just totally took themselves out of their own offense to feed DeAndre Ayton and get him engaged and get him involved. And if I was on the coaching staff, I think everyone would know that by now. That's not how I would approach DeAndre. I'd be very hard with him. I would say, this is our game plan. There's going to be nights like Denver where they stay with the shooters more, and we're going to be able to hit you on the roll, and you're going to get your touches, and you're going to get your points, and we need you to play the same defense. There's going to be nights where you roll 30 times to the bucket and they sink in on you and everyone else gets the shots. But you need to understand that that's what your role is on this team, and it needs to stay consistent every single night. And I think he's getting there slowly. The quotes last night, I don't put a lot into DeAndre Ayton quotes just because there's been so many of them that he hasn't followed up on, to be perfectly frank. And I do need to remind myself that he's 22 years old. I probably would have said some shit when I was 22 that I had no intention of ever backing up, but it's frustrating when he says things and doesn't back it up. But the stuff about him wanting to be a defensive anchor and doesn't care about touches on offense, I don't necessarily think that he believes that, but I do believe that that's what the team is telling him that he needs to believe, and that's why he's bringing it out in the quotes, because he knows it's the right thing to say for what they're asking him to do at the moment. And that's the DeAndre that I want to see, and the one that shuts us all up, basically, as you said. If he plays like that against Denver, we're not going to have many bad things to say about him, Max.
No, we really aren't. Like, it's kind of like the whole Luka thing, right? And it's like, and Trey or whoever else is in the draft with him, You're not going to compare. You're not going to be like, oh, we could have gotten this guy. It sucks. If DeAndre Ayton is great, right? If he's helping you,
Yep.
It doesn't matter if the other guy is way better. It doesn't matter. You'll still like him. You'll still have positive feelings towards him. And I think that's what people overlook. Like the people who are quote unquote Ayton haters. Like the only reason why we're hating on it is because it's the nights where he's not helping, where he's hurting, and like that kills you, right? As a number one pick. But if you have a number one pick who's, maybe say he's one All-Star game, whatever, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
If he has a really, really solid positive impact and helps you win, and you're on a bunch of deep playoff runs with him, you're really not going to worry that much about Luka Doncic or anybody else with him. It's going to be more about him. And listen, I agree. I actually really like the point you made about how he's likely just parroting what he's hearing right now from Chris Paul and Monty. That probably is true, and that's great. It's great that that's getting ingrained in him. It's great that he's absorbing it. Early returns, judging by the Denver game, or that maybe this Chris Paul thing will work with DeAndre Ayton. What we're all hoping for, that he'll listen to Chris Paul and it'll change him a little bit. But
you mean he's not gonna murder him like we all worried?
Not gonna murder him, yes. And I think I like the way he's doing it. It's very good cop, bad cop with Chris Paul. You see him like get mad and frustrated and yell at him sometimes. Other times you see him after the game saying, "I gotta get my big guy shots." He knows he can't just be mad at him and yell at him the whole time.
Yeah,
he's got to do both, and I think it might work out.
Yeah, I think we overdid, or the NBA fan base as a whole overdoes the whole Chris Paul thing, being a maniac and yelling at people. I think he's been around the league, seen enough types of players that he knows that you can't just be rah 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 all the time. Maybe made that mistake early on in the year in his career, and maybe with the Clippers, for instance, and has actually learnt from it. And that's kind of the sign of a really great NBA player like Chris Paul is he's kind of taking in all of these banks of information and memories that he's had, and putting it into how he's, I guess, developing this Phoenix Suns team. And I don't think that is giving him even too much credit for the impact that he's had on this team, and none more so than DeAndre Ayton. But I guess to finish off on DeAndre the way you started here with the whole I guess justifying the way we've talked about him in the past and things is, the question I'd throw at you is, after that Denver game, as much as we've talked about CP3's impact on this team, Booker getting back to normal, the surprise of Mikal making the leap, I think it's still pretty obvious to me that version of DeAndre Ayton is kind of what's standing in the way of this team being really, really good, as you said early on, versus just being good and making the first round of the playoffs or something. And I think we were maybe always guilty of fast forwarding too far forward, where we put the old DeAndre or the bad DeAndre in those playoff situations where we could just see that he was going to get outworked and outsmarted because it goes up to another level. And that's why we were very harsh, I guess is one word, or just very critical of him when he was bad, because I feel like we really understand that version of DeAndre is the one that you need every night. You can't have an off game in a playoff series, Max, because all of a sudden you get swept.
Yep.
Like, it's not that easy to win a playoff game. You need everyone locked in, every single minute of every single game.
And the scary thing is, with a lot of people, it doesn't get better. Right, like Andrew Wiggins, it didn't get better.
Yeah,
and that happens in NBA history. So while his defenders will always say he's young, blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, that is true, and there is a chance that he gets better. But the longer it goes on, the less likely that becomes, and that's why it gets really, really frustrating. So when you see it, even the beginning of the season, that's what led me to that tweet. Like, this is the time when it starts to get extremely frustrating, right? Because you're running out of almost time to be assured that he is going to end up being that player someday.
Yeah.
But listen, the Denver game is right in line with that. Mm-hmm. So if we get another one from the Clippers on Sunday, that's great. Let's keep building on him. Step by step. We need to get more than. I mean, what's the longest he's ever had in a row of great games, Dave? I remember like maybe a 3 or 4 game stretch last season. I remember being really good, but like we haven't seen a month out of him.
No, and I even asked after the Denver game whether it was the most kind of impactful game he's ever had in his career, particularly for a win.
Yeah.
A few other people threw out some examples, not realizing that I said that it had to be in a win, and that was the thing is, weirdly, a lot of his big games so far have been in losses, or maybe not even weirdly, because that's what we're getting at. It's like, it's not about your numbers and stuff all the time. It's about the impact on the team winning. And yeah, if he put in a stretch, which he robbed himself of last year with the suspension and then injuries of being able to do, if he puts in a real month stretch here of winning basketball, and the Suns have a really good record and kind of on the path of what there are now, he'll be getting credit from all circles, not only us but the wider NBA, and the bigwigs will be talking about his impact on the team as well. And I want to see that. And the Pelicans game, I think, is a perfect example of what you were talking about with, not having or running out of time, because, that opening play, everybody was heart in mouth, what the hell are you doing? But, as I said, it's actually the thing that I love the most about DeAndre, and his innocence and carefree attitude that maybe gets him in some strife situations sometimes, is actually probably the reason why he doesn't put his head down after something like that, and actually, wound up having a pretty good game after, the worst possible start with that play. And that's probably my favorite attribute about him. And, I was thinking after that game, he is a talent, not even on the same level as a guy like Dragan Bender, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But remember when Dragan used to have a play like that, and he would literally look like a G League player for the rest of the game, because it would be like he, saw his dog get shot or eaten by Chris Hansen, to kind of throw that in there as a tie back to Dragan Bender days. But, DeAndre doesn't have that problem. He's got the utmost confidence in himself, and it actually helps him, dig himself out of some situations sometimes too, which is why I still remain really positive of potentially getting the best version of DeAndre long term.
I hadn't thought of that before. I think it's a really good point. Like the lack of absolute win or die competitive nature.
Yeah.
Also helps him in some ways in the way you mentioned. Like you don't absolutely want to kill yourself because you missed a shot or whatever.
Exactly.
Right? It's like he's not that seriously. That's really interesting. All right, David. I have one more person left. How many do you have left?
I don't really have a single person. I've kind of teased it a couple of times through the pod, so I'll throw them out and we'll see if it kind of ties into your one left. Just back up big in general, the situation that we were put in with Dario missing so far, and then I just had a group of the rest, which is your Langston Galloway, Javon Carters of the world. So I'm going to let you dictate where we finish off here. We're already at our traditional hour and a half mark, so let's finish off with however you want to finish here, Max.
I think there's one more person we really need to mention, and this is not the person, but you brought up backup bigs. I just want to real quick give a shout out to Dario, who looked amazing in the two games he played. Not too worried about the injury. It sounds like he's just taking a rest day.
Yeah.
The last one, just to make sure that it doesn't get bad. But I mean, I'm sure you're encouraged. You love Dario, Dave. I'm sure you're encouraged at what you've seen from him.
I love him. I'm just super happy he had that bubble run that he did, and it just kind of felt, looking back on it, everything just kind of fell right. Like, Aaron Baines clearly didn't have a future on this team by the sounds of things, so him being out with COVID, opened up this position for Dario, which they may not have otherwise had, because, the Suns front office this Suns front office has tended to do the right things by players, so even if Baines didn't have a future with the team, they probably would have played him every game, to build his stock up, help him sign somewhere new. That's just who this front office seems to be. But it all just fell right for Dario to take that backup 5 spot. And, I don't think it's a stretch to say he was off the team before those 8 games. He just never got into a role. He had a couple of decent stretches, but no kind of prolonged stretch, much like you said with DeAndre before. There was nothing to look back on and go, oh, how about that month where Dario was awesome, and the bubble became that, and it gave them something to think about. And they built their whole off season around it, which the only thing I was going to mention is it's a little bit of a weakness. You mentioned Jones early on. I don't think any Suns fan listening really wants to see much of him other than garbage time going forward. Frank has been serviceable. He knows how to play, so he's been able to kind of plug and play in for Dario when he's been resting, as you said, to manage that through. I'm with you. I think they're just kind of playing it smart because they know how valuable he is. And I'm sitting on the edge here, Max, where on one side it's like, if you get the good version of DeAndre and the good version that we've seen of Dario so far for 48 minutes a game, this team's going to be really fucking good at that position particularly. Like, they're just going to get 48 great minutes, can play a couple of different ways. I love the 5-out stuff that Dario can give them. The ball just absolutely pings around when he's out there because he just moves it on. I love that. Then I go the other side and it's like, what if Ayton or Dario misses a little bit of time and either Dario has to step up into starting 5 and then we've got no backup, or vice versa? I really worry about a really rough stretch of games if one of those things happen. So, as I said, on the edge of being just crazy positive versus going down the road of like, what if COVID takes one of these guys out for a little while or something?
Yeah, Jalen Smith may be able to come along eventually. I don't think he's quite ready yet. Although he looked better as a backup 5 than he did when he was playing the 4. Okay, so you're...
No arguments from me on that.
I know you're on that train. So you kind of led right into what I wanted to get to, and I think we can end with this. I think it kind of sums everything up pretty well.
Yep.
I want to talk about Monty Williams and James Jones. And kind of in combination with what they've done. So, first of all, I want to talk about James Jones. James Jones, I mean, maybe he's not the best at asset value. We've said this before. Like, maybe he doesn't know, like, what, he doesn't have a good chart that he looks at to see what picks are worth what or whatever.
Yep.
But the guy apparently knows who's good at basketball and who isn't good at basketball, and apparently knows what roles are needed on a basketball team, because he, assuming health, as you just said, sort of assembled a perfect basketball team where everybody fits together just seamlessly. And I like how you brought in Frank. I wanted to use Frank with this. I don't think Frank Kaminsky's good. I've been very clear about that on Twitter. I've called him a European player multiple times this season already. I still mostly believe that.
Isn't it funny how that doesn't get you as much hate as saying that DeAndre Ayton isn't very good, Max?
It's almost like one of them went to U of A and the other one scorched U of A. But they were able to plug Kaminsky in, and Kaminsky into that role that Dario plays, and he wasn't nearly as good at it, obviously, but like it still worked. You know what I mean? Because they knew they had a backup big problem. They knew Kaminsky knew their system, and it just made sense for them to go get him for that role after Damian Jones was obviously unplayable. Mm-hmm. And so that's the James Jones part of it, and I want you to comment on that. But then also the Monty Williams part of it. I mean, it's hard to remember now, but remember the first couple of games they didn't look very good.
Yep. Especially
offensively, they were kind of out of sorts.
Yep.
And that has totally changed. They've completely gelled. It feels like they've really Monty figured out very quickly that Langston Galloway needed to play more, and each one more not at all. It took him a game to figure that out.
Yeah.
I'm so impressed with Monty and what he's doing. He's made a few mistakes in my opinion, but mostly I think he's been great. And obviously the whole leadership thing's working with him. The team loves him. He works perfectly with Chris Paul. They're almost like a partnership in some ways because of how humble Monty Williams is.
Yep.
That's kind of what I want to turn it to. With the James Jones, the Monty Williams partnership, it's just working out perfectly.
I'm really glad you brought both of them up because I didn't think to do it. I've been so into watching the games and writing notes on the players and bringing up the players on this opportunity that we got that it was a blind spot. I just didn't think about it. I'm really glad that you have because it's given us an opportunity to end on it here because they're really the reason that we sit in this position. And, not to say that either of them are without fault, as you say.
Yep.
Monty, if he could find someone to draw up his after timeouts and end of game plays, I'd be a lot happier. and Jones, as you said, maybe not the best at asset kind of management, although I've always been really strong on this. I think he was given a dumpster fire and he just said, for 18 months, I'm just going to take the, suspected win-loss on this trade from an asset standpoint and actually build a team that fucking makes sense. And I think that you bringing that up, it just made me think how much James Jones is the GM that we should have thought he was. Like, sure, a little bit inexperienced and doesn't know some of the ins and outs and scouting and things like that, but he's a role player for several championship teams who would have just had a lot of time to sit back and see how teams work and how important chemistry is and how you build around your star players and didn't play that much, so was observing a lot of the time. And I think all of that goes into what makes him quite a good GM at this point, on the verge of being a great one if he can, stick it out with the Suns and kind of see it through or see this team's iteration at least through to whatever its final kind of stage ends up being. And, good that you bring them both up at the same time as well, because I think it's really important to note, and I think a lot of people try and bring it up, but it's just not a sexy thing to talk about, how your GM, front office, whatever you want to call it, and your owner and your coach are all aligned is really, really important to what ends up happening on the court. And if those things are off, which I think frankly they were for the last 10 years.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
I'm going to go out on a limb here to end the pod. Real hot take, which I know I'm not known for, but yeah, I think they were maybe just a little skew if for a few years there, Max. But it's super important. You've got to have those things in mind. And, I've had fun with it looking at, Jeff Bauer and some moves that they've made, and looking at guys that have played for Monty in the past of who they might add in off seasons and things like that. But as much as I've had fun with it and had a few wins doing that, it's actually really important because it shows that Jones isn't just going and grabbing players and being like, here, do something with this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do we really think that they signed Campaign before the bubble if Monty didn't have some experience with him in OKC? No, because how are you going to bring a guy in brand new,
no way,
teach him the system, and then throw him the keys to backup point guard and go, God, I hope this works out okay? You're just not going to do it. Like, they're going to have a conversation and go, hey, Payne's out there, like, what do you think? And then Monty's going to say, yeah, I really liked him, good kid, hard worker, all the things we've, heard Monty say in the press since. So, yeah, super important that they're in lockstep with one another. And, I don't want to give Robert Sarver too much credit. I think I already gave him quite a big shout out in terms of making the Suns get to the bubble, because without the bubble we don't probably get Chris Paul and a bunch of other things. So, if he was the one beating the desk to get the Suns in at those owner meetings, then, I feel like he needed a little bit of credit. He does seem to have found these two guys and kind of handed it over to them, at least until this point. I'm always going to be a little bit skeptical with his history, but shout out to that whole conglomerate, including Jeff Bauer, who I love to throw in there every now and then, even just for a little bit of fun. So
yeah, you have a bit of a Jeff Bauer fetish, David. It's all right. No judgment on this podcast. Just the last couple of things on James Jones, then we can go to 7 seconds or less.
Yeah.
He is the most important quality in a GM, and that is not caring what the public thinks about you or what the media is going to say about you or anything like that.
Correct.
And you can't succeed without having that quality. All the best GMs have it, because you can't do you can't reach a vision by listening to what the crowd thinks.
Yeah.
You're just not going to.
Yeah.
So I think that's what led him to make some of the moves he's made, which, by the way, two of his most panned and made fun of, criticized situations were trading the 6th pick for the 11th pick and Dario Saric, which has worked out just splendidly.
Mm-hmm.
So just maybe stop criticizing for that. And the other one was the night where the stupid, I can't even remember right now, what were the names that they got mixed up? The Brookses?
The Brookses, yeah.
Listen, that was... all we heard is probably that was maybe more Memphis' fault anyway. But then he somehow turns that into Oubre, and that was just a brilliant move to do that. That's how you make a situation where you wasn't even going after Oubre, but he saw hey, this guy, he's young, he's a wing, maybe we can do something with him. Let's just turn this terrible situation into something positive, and just did it, and it worked out amazingly. Obviously, there's an Oubre thing now with the fan base, but the different team and everything. But he got us Chris Paul, and he was great while he was here. So I mean, how could you not if you're gonna make fun of James Jones so much at the time of those moves, you need to go back and reassess that and mea culpa that, because you're just wrong.
Yep, I agree, and you can even throw Ricky Rubio in, which 30 GMs or whatever survey it was said it was the worst signing of that offseason, and not only did he and Oubre lift the floor of the team and gain some respect back, they were the key pieces that were thrown into the Chris Paul move. So yeah, he is or has put a team on the floor that, I think I've said this before online, is kind of what Ryan McDonough was always aiming to do and just never did, and was kind of always, one finger on the trigger but never actually doing anything. And James Jones, probably the biggest difference, wasn't scared to make the move and what people might have thought, rather than waiting out for the absolute perfect scenario, which frankly just never comes in the NBA. And I think James Jones knew that, and certainly knew it over the guy that he replaced for the Suns. So yeah, I think that's the perfect way to end out. The only other things I would mention before we go to 7 seconds or less is Langston Galloway. If there's a stat for how quickly someone scores when they come on the court, I think he'd be leading that stat probably in the history of the game.
Yes.
And Javon Carter just can't hit a shot right now, but I'm sure that'll come around, because I think He showed himself to be just too good of a shooter that he's just not going to, start to bounce back.
Yep. And he even had a couple nice jumpers in the Denver game. Well, real quick, for 7 seconds or less, the one thing I want to comment on, you said that Ryan McDonough was trying to do this thing that they have now. That was his vision that he couldn't get to.
Yeah.
Ryan, the answer was point guard. That was the answer you were looking for. Point guard. You need one of those in the NBA, it turns out.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Let's go to 7 seconds or less, the segment where now both of us will ask the other 3 questions, which the other has 7 seconds or less to answer and has not prepared for. David, do you want to ask me first?
Sure. What was your win prediction before the start of the season, and would you change it if you got an opportunity to now?
Yes and yes. Mine was 43, so pretty high.
Same as mine.
No, well, it was 44. I don't remember. It was 43 or 44. The only reason I say that, I think I was above you by one game.
Yep.
I think I remember thinking that. We were right next to each other, but I was one game above you, so it was 44. Yeah, I would. I would say 48. Part of it is they already banked some tough wins already, but they just look like they look better than I thought they were going to look.
Yep.
What would you say? Would you do that?
Yeah, I think I would, maybe just by a couple. And again, I think we've heard it enough through this pod, but that's the pessimist in me. I'm expecting some sort of a rough patch, whether it's COVID or injuries or something at some standpoint. So it might even back out a little bit. But right now, you would have to.
Fair enough. All right. Which of these early season positive trends are you most and least confident will continue?
Okay.
There's 3. First is Mikal's offensive leap. 2 is the team defense of the entire team. And 3 is Cam Payne's overall leap.
You're really testing me with this one. I would say that I'm probably some version of positive on all 3, so don't take this the wrong way when I say the least likely, but
okay.
I got to stick to my brand. I think Mikal has shown enough for me now. I think that's here to stay, so I'd say most likely on that. I would say the defense is just in the middle. I think, they're good. I know that the eyes are telling me that they're good, so that'll kind of maybe dip a little bit, but I'll put that in the middle. And as much as I said that I wouldn't be a Cam Payne doubter anymore, as I said, I think it's the least of the 3, but I wouldn't read too much into that. I would still expect him to drop off a little bit, purely because of what I saw in how much he hasn't really changed other than hitting shots, and that might come back to bite him a little bit.
Yep. When I put those together, I purposely gave you 3 that were really all seemed pretty good, and they're going to continue just to make you struggle. And I agree with your thoughts too on those. All right, hit me with number 2.
Here's a random one. Who's a player or type of player the Suns could trade for this season that would take them from where they are now to another level altogether?
Player or type of player? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I didn't want to make you think of a player exactly if you couldn't. So just what are we missing to, I guess we've pretty much spent an hour and 45 minutes saying this team's really good. What if we kind of get to the trade deadline and want to be like contender good maybe? What do we need?
Yeah, so I would say there's really no obvious need to me, especially of the kind you're talking about, because I don't think, it's not like we don't have a X player at all that should get us that level.
Yeah.
But I think that, if realistically, I think if we were really going to jump to like this is a finals team or a contender for it, it would be something like one of those really star wings in the league, like Kawhi or Paul George, or that's not Paul George, you sign an extension. But somebody who really matters on the wing, Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
These are bad examples because it wouldn't happen, but somebody like that demanding a trade, and us actually trading like Mikal and Cam, which would kill me, or something like that for that. But that's what could really make us a finals team, right?
Yeah, because I guess the Mikal that we've seen in 6 games, you're basically just locking in that that's the guy that you've got for the playoffs. Whereas, as you said, there's still a little bit of doubt that Mikal is going to be consistent and to the level of some of those guys that you mentioned. So yeah, I think that's a good.
And it'd be unfair to expect that, right?
Oh, of course.
It's unfair to If Kawhi Leonard's on the team, I almost made it's almost a stupid answer I make it. It's like no shit. Max, your answer is if they trade for Kawhi Leonard, they'll be better. But that's kind of my point. I guess there would be I don't see a trade other than that. There's nothing on the margins I think they desperately need.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, I'll give you the next one, which is the inverse of the one I gave you the first time. So, which of these early season negative trends are you the most and least confident will turn around? 3 again. The first one, Booker's turnovers. 2 is Ayton's inconsistency. And 3 is CP3's poor shooting efficiency.
That last one really throws me, because I would have said definitely most confident that Booker will turn the turnovers around. But as you noted in that section, he's kind of always going to be a turnover guy. So let's put him in the middle.
Okay.
I think Chris Paul's shooting efficiency will definitely come back up. There's just too much data over 15 years to suggest that it will. So I'm not worried about that. And again, don't kill me for it, guys, because I think the highs are going to be really high and maybe the lows will be fewer and far between. But I think probably for at least the rest of his rookie deal, there's still going to be inconsistency with DeAndre Ayton. We just have to learn to live with it.
Yep, I totally agree with that entire answer. I originally actually had Booker's turnovers, but you convinced me. I think you're right on that. All right, what's your last one for me?
All right, last one. There's been some expansion talk recently after some comments from Adam Silver. Let's say it's coming into next season and the Suns, made a real deep run in the playoffs this season. So we've got one more shot at it with CP, for instance. You can only protect 5 players.
Oh, God.
Who
5?
are you saying are our most important 5 players going into next season to make a real run at the title?
That's wild. First of all, I think they usually let you keep more than that, David. You're being mean to me.
Here's the thing. They usually normally let you keep 7. But here's 7 that I think you have to choose from. Ayton, Booker, Bridges, Cam Johnson, Chris Paul, Jay Crowder, and Dario Saric. So which 2 of those are you...
Well, you named them basically in the exact order, I think, that I would keep them in. I think it's with the 5 for sure, I think, for me. I don't even think it's that hard, actually. It's less hard than I thought it was going to be. It's CP3, Ayton, Booker, Mikal, and Cam Johnson. I think that best combination of future and current value. Like, why the hell would you have to keep Cam Johnson, man, the way he's playing right now? And he's also got on a rookie contract. Like, how do you not keep him?
All right, here we go. So it's less of a dud. You got 6 players, so choose between Crowder and Dario.
So, are you just going to make fun of me if I say campaign? Are you just going to make fun of me?
I mean, it would be true to this podcast overall that we've just had. So, yeah, go for it.
I would say if he, because I guess the thing would, we would know how the whole season went, right? Mm-hmm. So we would already know. So if Campaign puts this entire season together of this, I think that actually might be my answer.
I like it. You always throw a curveball. That's good. Let's throw one last out here and round this one out.
All right. So this one's kind of related to what we just the first one you asked me. So, but it's different a little bit. It's a different way to think about it. Now that you've seen these 6 games, what seed do you think the Phoenix Suns will finish with in the Western Conference?
This is real tough. It's something I've been thinking about over the offseason and the start of this year. I have become so entrenched in watching Suns games and rewatching Suns games that I've become a little bit removed from the rest of the NBA and how good everyone else is looking. But if I put that to one side...
Well, David, real quick, you did see us just trounce 2 of the Western Conference's top contenders in the last 2 days.
Exactly, yeah. So if I put that weakness to one side and just kind of go with the team that I'm seeing and who they're beating so far, we're a home court team.
Yes.
It just feels... I know that's maybe a little bit of a cop-out, but we are a home court team.
It's not a cop-out at all.
I think we're a 4 seed, if I'm going to put a number on it.
I said before the season that I saw 4 or 5 seed. After the preseason, I said that. That's what I saw. I think I'm going to go with 4. I'm going to go with 4. I feel like you're kind of saying 4.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the most reasonable answer that I could give. But I kind of want to say 3. I think there's only 2 teams that are clearly better than them in the conference.
Yeah.
There's only 2 teams that it's the LA teams.
I'd agree with that.
No one else is clearly better than they are. And if you're going to be optimistic about it, then just say, hey, then they're going to be the best one, right? And I do want to just throw this possibility out, David, because, listen, it was just been an incredible start to the season.
Yep.
I'm getting some flashbacks to that 04-05 season with Nash when he showed up, and out of nowhere, they were just the 1 seed all of a sudden. I certainly would not bet on them being the 1 seed. But, I mean, look at 538's model has them the 4th best team in the league right now. Like, is it impossible that because the Lakers take a lot of games off, that the Suns just kind of take the league a little bit by storm here and become the 1 seed?
I mean, they're young. They're going to play hard. They've got stars. It's kind of got all those hallmarks of, a team that could make a splash like that. So, look at us being crazy positive here again to end the pod. You mentioned 538 there, though. How wild is it and how sick does it make you feel when you see even like 7% to win the title in that column? Like, it's like, what world are we all of a sudden living in?
I'm allowing myself to imagine what it would be like if the Suns won the NBA title with Chris Paul winning the Finals MVP. Like Chris Paul getting over his demons at the same time this franchise does. Like that dude would. They use that phrase that's overused that he'd never buy another drink in Phoenix again.
Yeah.
But that would actually apply to that relationship that the city would have with him if that happened.
Now I'm just envisioning like a Charles Barkley blowout from Chris Paul. He just goes, I won my title. I'm opting out of my deal. And I'm retiring, and I'm just going to get fat because what else do I need to do?
What a storybook that would be. You think Toronto loves Kawhi for his one title? Just imagine we would love him for the one title.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I think that's it for us. David, plug everything that has to do with your amazing newsletter that everybody should be reading.
Oh, really? If you're listening to this, you're probably already subscribing. Maybe if you are an old 7 seconds or less listener and just saw it on Twitter, you're seeing it for the first time, please hit subscribe. It definitely helps me have to share it less on Twitter and things, which I don't love doing as well. But just wanted to give a huge shout out to everyone that has been reading and supporting, because it's just been awesome. I've hit all the goals that I've set for myself. Everyone's been super supportive, and it helps me kind of create bigger and better content, hopefully, and throwing the odd podcast in because the team is too fun not to talk about, Max, is probably my most fun thing to do with the newsletter as well. So thanks to you for jumping on and doing this with me.
Yeah, absolutely loved it. We'll if the team keeps playing this well, I'm sure we'll do it again. I am sure. One last thing I will say, harkening back to the playoffs in the Nash era, which we may be finally getting back to, beat LA.
Yes.